Hi, it's Christina with the Sisyphean Journal. Sorry for my suitcase here, but I'm packing for vacation. But don't worry, I'll still be here for you. If you look at the media right now, for some reason there are two safe and legal abortion deaths that are being shouted from the rooftops. And the reason they're being shouted from the rooftops is even though these women died because they trusted the abortion lobby, they took their abortion pills that are supposedly safer than Tylenol, they went septic, and they died as a result. These are abortion deaths, but the abortion lobby is saying that the reason they were not provided with the aftercare they needed was because of abortion laws. Now, somehow we are supposed to believe that a heartbeat bill saying you are not allowed to kill an embryo or fetus that has a detectable heartbeat applies to a woman who has no fetus whatsoever in her uterus. Keep in mind that's what they're asking you to believe when they blame these deaths on abortion laws. But let's get to something a little bit more substantial, shall we? And that's the fact that suddenly these two abortion deaths, they're broadcasting because they've come up with some convoluted way to blame them on the heartbeat bill. Again, they're saying that a bill saying you're not allowed to gratuitously kill a fetus that has a heartbeat somehow applies to women whose uteruses contain zero fetuses. Okay? So that they are so blatantly lying, it's ridiculous. What about all the other abortion deaths that somehow they just big fat hairy deal, you got to break some eggs to make an omelet, I guess. And they go, all surgery has risk. So we're going to look at some of the safe and legal abortion deaths that for some reason just don't seem to raise any ire. And we can start with April Lowry. April was so weak when she left the abortion clinic that she could barely walk. Her companion had to support her walking to the car. She bled to death on the way home. Thanks to the Dobbs decision that these media people hate so much, the abortion clinic that sent her home to bleed to death isn't an abortion clinic anymore. They're an actual medical clinic. They provide medical care to underserved women. But these people want them to go back to doing abortions and sending women home to bleed to death like they did with April. Okay, how disgusting is that? Then we have Tia Parks. Tia went to preterm clinic for a safe and legal abortion. They managed to get one fetus out, but they didn't notice that she also had a concurrent ectopic pregnancy. This is something the National Abortion Federation, a jury of abortionists, would find in her family's favor in the lawsuit, because this is a known possibility. You check and, oh, there's one there, there's one there. She's having symptoms after her abortion. You don't just add in whatever. You keep in mind that this is possible. Okay, so they should have detected this. They didn't. Keisha died. And Keisha isn't the only woman that died after an abortion at preterm. Lakeisha Wilson died there. Her heart started slowing and eventually stopped beating, but preterm staff didn't follow any protocols. And to make it even worse, remember how they talk about TRAP laws, targeted restriction of abortion providers or something like that, targeted regulation of abortion providers, arguing that there's absolutely no legitimate medical reason to have the hallways wide enough that you can get a woman on a gurney out of the building. Well, Lakeisha stopped breathing, and the medics had to stop performing CPR to get her down the elevator because the elevator was too small to lay the gurney flat. They had to stop doing CPR on her while they were in the elevator. Do you hear the abortion lobby crying about Lakeisha's death or Tia's death? Oh, and they're picking on black women, they're picking on black women, they're picking on black women. Well, Tia and Lakeisha were both black. Do their deaths matter to the abortion lobby? No. So abortion clinic sending women home to die? No problem. Abortion clinic not meeting the standards of an outpatient surgical center, so medics aren't able to provide CPR to a patient and she dies? No problem. Then we have Keisha Atkins. She was at Curtis Boyd's clinic in New Mexico. They were under investigation already for pushing illegal late abortions so that they could harvest fetal tissue. They were doing a 4-day late-term abortion on Keisha. She went septic. They called an ambulance but then canceled it. She ended up dead. But do you hear them crying about Keisha's death? And again, looking at the picture, she does not look like a white girl. She looks maybe like she's biracial or Hispanic. We can look at Diamond Williams, another young black woman, went to a National Abortion Federation clinic for her abortion. She went home. She was having alarming symptoms, kept calling the clinic. They kept telling her no problem. She ended up dead. Cue crickets. Jamie Lee Morales. Again, supposedly women bleeding out in the parking lot is going to be a big deal. This guy lacerated her innards. She was hemorrhaging, sent her home to bleed to death. Again, cue crickets from all these people who are supposedly so concerned about women's lives. Cree Irwin Shepherd. She went to Planned Parenthood for an abortion. Oh yeah, and she was a young black woman too. Went to Planned Parenthood for an abortion. They sent her home. She went septic. Her mother found her dead. And if you want to hear what the abortion lobby doesn't want you to hear, go on YouTube and look for Cree Irwin Shepherd 911 call and hear her anguished mother calling 911 when she found her daughter cold and stiff. But again, cue crickets. Can't blame this on abortion laws, not even if you tie yourself into knots like they did with Candy and Amber. Cue crickets. The abortion lobby doesn't care. The media don't care. And we have Lakeisha Wilson, another young black woman. She went to preterm clinic for a safe and legal abortion. When she stopped breathing, the medics had to wait for the elevator to get down from the 3rd floor while they were trying to perform CPR. This clinic was on the 3rd floor. And the abortion lobby goes, oh, these trap laws, targeted restrictions on abortion providers. That abortion clinics shouldn't meet the same standards of other outpatient surgery clinics. This abortion clinic was in a building with an elevator so small that the medics couldn't have the gurney lie flat. So to get Lakeisha out of the building, they had to stop performing CPR. She died. Cue crickets. Can't blame it on an abortion law, so her death doesn't matter. Jennifer McKenna Morbelli. She went to a pro-choice hero, Leroy Carhart's abortion clinic. This was a fetal indications abortion, so nobody offered this poor woman perinatal hospice that I know of. She wound up going to Leroy Carhart for a late fetal indications abortion. She started suffering complications. Her family called the emergency number that had been provided by the clinic, and it rang to Carhart's wife's equestrian supply business, their voicemail. Not to put too fine a point on it, but Jennifer wasn't a horse. She didn't need tack and harness. She needed emergency medical care. But her family tried to reach Carhart. They get, for all your equestrian needs. And she ended up dead. Then we have Maria Santiago, who went to Associates in OB/GYN care, a very seedy Baltimore abortion facility. When she stopped breathing, they were like, didn't follow proper procedures. She ended up dead, but you can't blame it on abortion laws, so big fat hairy deal, cue crickets, right? Tanya Reeves, young black woman, goes to Planned Parenthood for an abortion. She's hemorrhaging. They delay providing care for 4 hours. Just leave her there bleeding. By the time they got her to the hospital to perform emergency surgery, it was too late to save her. Can't blame it on abortion law, so big fat hairy deal, another dead black woman that the media just doesn't care about. Then there's a woman who's only identified in the medical board documents as SH. I call her Sherelle in my blog because I don't feel like calling them by initials really humanizes them. She went to Presidential Women's Center in West Palm Beach, Florida. Dr. Frank Rodriguez pushed a cervical dilator into her uterus and then left it there. So she ended up dying. Again, can't blame it on abortion laws, so big fat hairy deal, who could possibly care, right? And then I'll just cover a few off the top of my head, a few of the more egregious cases. Reputable abortion clinics, including National Abortion Federation members, were referring women to Kermit Gosnell. In fact, he worked one day a week at a National Abortion Federation clinic, starting illegal third trimester abortions there and finishing them in his Philadelphia House of Horrors. The abortion that culminated in the murder of baby boy A was initiated at that National Abortion Federation clinic in Delaware. And the state knew how bad the place was. They knew about the flea-infested cats roaming around, crapping on the floor. They knew about the untrained staff. They knew about people just pushing drugs, not even keeping track of how much of these dangerous narcotics they were pushing into women's bodies. State knew about it, did absolutely nothing because they didn't want to possibly limit access. Better to have Kermit Gosnell than, travel across the state line into Maryland or even go to a different abortionist in Pennsylvania. But no, we need them handy for those women that I get the feeling the Democrats consider less desirable. People who don't know how to get a voter ID. Let's just put it that way. Gosnell sent Samika Shaw home to die of sepsis from an incomplete abortion, and his untrained staff overdosed a refugee, Karnamaya Mangar. And then when she stopped breathing, they just dressed the clinic to make it look like they'd been trying to revive her. Nobody there knew how to do CPR. The emergency equipment was broken. When the medics got there, it was almost impossible to get her out of the building because of all the twists and turns and stepping in cat crap literally on the floors. The emergency exit was padlocked shut and they had to get the fire department to cut it open. But big fat hairy deal. A couple of minority women die at a safe legal abortion clinic. Can't blame it on abortion laws, so let's just turn a blind eye. Iris Sagbaga, she was hemorrhaging. The receptionist, who had no medical training, was begging Abram Zelikman to take a look at her and figure out why she was bleeding so badly. Zelikman said, "I'll just put an ice pack on her," left. The receptionist became more and more alarmed, finally called 911, but it was too late to save Iris, and she bled to death. Gloria Aponte, after her abortion death, they discovered that Hanan Rotem, National Abortion Federation member, had a receptionist with no medical training administering general anesthesia. We have KB at the Center for Reproductive and Sexual Health. They didn't even know how much anesthesia they gave her because they were estimating it by eye. She stopped breathing. They didn't properly resuscitate her, but they had her charted as pink responsive alert when she was already clinically dead. Deanna Bell, 13 years old, National Abortion Federation clinic. They massively overdosed her on Brevital, did not promptly seek emergency care for her. She ended up dead. And the National Abortion Federation flagship Family Planning Associates medical group that this young girl died at, they've got, I think it's 18 dead abortion patients, if I recall correctly. It was certainly at least 17. Again, you can't blame it on abortion law, so why bother? It's not tragic, is it? Diane Boyd, an intellectually disabled woman who was raped in the institution where she lived. Parents arranged an abortion at a National Abortion Federation clinic. They administered drugs that interacted with the medications she had taken at the facility. The clinic knew about these drugs. Evidently, they didn't read the chart. They just gave her meds, killed her. There were two other, that was Reproductive Health Services. I can't remember the names. Sorry, but they had other women died there. Belinda Bird, young black woman, abortion at Inglewood Women's Hospital in Los Angeles. She was the 69th of 74 women that abortionist Stephen Pine pushed through Inglewood's single procedure room that day. Fully 24 of those abortions performed in the final 2 hours of that day. And she bled and bled and bled and bled and bled and bled, and they could find no pulse. Sent her to the hospital, but by then the damage had been done. She lingered and eventually died. And her mother pitched a fit because this wasn't the first young black woman to die at their facility. It wasn't the first. Kathy Murphy had already died, and Lynette Wallace. Then Elizabeth Suji and Cora Lewis died. Again, you can't blame it on abortion laws, so see no evil. Doesn't matter, does it? Marla Cardamone. She was badgered into an unwanted abortion by a hospital social worker. The doctor used an antiquated abortion technique, botched it, and they failed to provide proper care as she slowly went septic. She died, and supposedly she had to have this abortion because the fetus had been damaged by Marla's depression meds. Autopsy found the fetus had been perfectly healthy. So they badgered this woman into an unwanted abortion by telling her that her fetus was severely disabled and would be unadoptable, and she'd be unable to help care for her paralyzed father if she had this baby. So they badgered her into an unwanted abortion of a perfectly healthy baby by telling her that the baby was severely disabled. Pamela Coulson, sent home hemorrhaging. Her friends noticed in the back seat she was actually unconscious, not sleeping, pulled over. Bystanders performed CPR while they called an ambulance. She bled to death. Cue crickets. Nobody cares. Betty D'Amato. Her doctor knowingly performed an incomplete abortion and sent her home with a trash bag to collect any fetal parts she expelled. She went septic and died. Barbara Lee Davis, first National Abortion Federation death that I know of, sent her home with the face and spinal column of her aborted baby embedded in a tear in her uterus. She bled to death. Then we have Wilma Harris and Jeannie English. They trusted erstwhile criminal abortionist Milan Vooch for their safe and legal abortions. He let them die. Google his name, Milan Vuitch. All you're going to see is these hyographic obituaries because he challenged the DC abortion law and changed how it was enforced. No dead women at all attributed to his rather bustling criminal practice. Once it was legalized, he got sloppy and killed 2 women. Again, cue crickets, can't blame it on abortion laws, so their deaths just don't matter to the pro-choice movement. Kristen Gilbert. She died from an abortion at George Tiller's clinic. It was actually, well, let's back up a little bit. George Tiller's clinic, again, pro-choice icon. They love him. Oh, he's a hero. She had Down syndrome, and she was very late in her pregnancy, but they justified the abortion on medical grounds. When she collapsed at the hotel, and remember, these late abortions are not done in hospitals. You come to the clinic for a step, you go to the hotel, stay overnight with family and friends. Go to the clinic for the next step, go back to the hotel. She collapsed at the hotel. Instead of calling 911, her family loaded her unconscious body onto a luggage cart to get it out to the minivan, take her to the clinic. Leroy Carhart was the one providing care there. They called 911. When the medics got there, Carhart was performing CPR so ineptly they didn't realize he was a doctor. They thought he was a bystander. She died. Again, shrug your shoulders, can't blame it on an abortion law, so her death doesn't matter. Sherry Graham, that's the woman that died at Carol Everett's clinic. Lacerated cervix, but the abortionist didn't bother to detect it. He went home. Carol said it's because his girlfriend had margaritas waiting, which I can certainly believe. Left her in the care of the clinic owner who had no medical training. There is Carol with this hemorrhaging woman. She finally sends her home because that's what Harvey told her to do. And then when they called Sherry and her boyfriend because she was bleeding so bad, he said to put her in a bathtub. She bled out. Again, can't blame it on abortion laws, so who cares? Carolina Gutierrez. She had come to the United States as a refugee when she was 13 years old. She went to an abortion clinic behind her husband's back. She went septic. She kept calling the clinic and nobody would answer. She finally wound up in the hospital. her arms and legs turning black from gangrene, had to have them amputated in a last-ditch attempt to save her life, and she still ended up dead. Can't blame it on abortion. Oh, but they did try to blame her death on clinic regulations. That, well, if you didn't require abortion clinics to follow the same safety standards as outpatient surgery centers, the filthy substandard clinics she went to wouldn't have been operating. That's the logic they used. Seriously, they blamed it on regulations requiring safety standards for abortion clinics and not on the fact that there was a substandard abortion clinic. Supposedly, this filthy abortion clinic was only able to operate because there were regulations in place. We're supposed to believe that. Sharon Hamplin. Google Bruce Steer, S-T-I-E-R or S-T-E-I-R. I think it's I-E-R. Google him. He pulled out a loop of her intestine, poked it back in, left the clinic, left her in the care of staff. He wasn't even there. She was weak. They had to put her in a wheelchair to get her out to her mother's car. She bled to death on the way home. And when he was prosecuted in her death, the pro-choice people started a legal defense fund for the man who killed her. That's how much they care about young black women's lives. Luann Herron. They kept fudging the ultrasounds. She was so far along that it looked like they weren't going to be able to legally do the abortion. But, you know, they're measuring the size of the baby's head. And so if you kind of get the baby's head at the proper angle, you can get a lower measurement. Lacerated her insides. She was bleeding out. He left. Bye. I got to catch a plane. She bled to death. He had a previous patient, Lisa Bardsley, that he'd sent home to bleed to death. Again, you can't blame it on the abortion law, so the abortion lobby just doesn't care. Suzanne Logan. 60 Minutes actually covered her death. It was so egregious. They were just big deal. She was knocked out, anesthetized before abortionist Gideon Kyoko even went into the room. She was turning gray from lack of oxygen. He just kept on with the abortion. She wound up comatose in a nursing home. When she regained consciousness, she was paralyzed and unable to speak. It was the pro-lifers that bought her a Canon communicator and went and visited her. Pro-choicers didn't care about this woman. Suzanne eventually died of her injuries. And they had also done the same thing to a woman named Deborah Gray. Just let her die from anesthesia complications. But again, you can't blame it on abortion laws, so who could possibly care? Sophie McCoy, 17-year-old girl, died of a botched abortion performed by Dr. Abu, the butcher of Avenue A, Hyatt, who really made the news when he tore the arm off a 32-week fetus, realized, this is further along than I thought, sent the woman home. She went into labor, gave birth to a live baby with her arm torn off. He was a National Abortion Federation member. Cream of the crop. Nothing to see here. Yvonne Mesteth and Linda Padfield. Google their abortionist. Benjamin Munson, M-U-N-S-O-N. Another pro-choice icon. They love this guy. Why do they love him? Because he was openly doing illegal abortions in South Dakota before abortion was legalized. He apparently couldn't count to 4. 1 + 1 = 4. I guess that's new woke math. Sent each of them home with major retained fetal parts. Both of them died of sepsis. But hey, he did illegal abortions. He was a great guy. Never mind the 2 dead women. Guadalupe Negron. You know how pro-choicers hate fake clinics, meaning pro-life centers that do ultrasounds and hand out diapers? The fake clinic where she went for a safe legal abortion, they don't care very much about that, do they? Advertised as a clinic, wasn't a clinic, was just a doctor's office, was filthy, totally inept staff, lacerated her innards, something crazy, were putting oxygen into her stomach instead of her lungs. She died. But again, you can't blame it on abortion laws, so her death doesn't matter. And you know how those women who died in Georgia died of sepsis from their abortion pills? They weren't the first. Holly Patterson died of sepsis after taking abortion pills. Chanel Bryant, Orianne Shevin, and Vivian Tran. They got their pills at Planned Parenthood and at National Abortion Federation clinics. Died of sepsis, but nothing to see here because we can't find a convoluted way to try to blame it on an abortion law. Yeah, supposedly these women's lives matter to the pro-choice movement. And while I'm going through my list, I'm just scrolling down through my cemetery of choice in alphabetical order and reviewing the ones where I have a lot of memory of how appalling their deaths were. This one, Erica Peterson. Okay, 1961. Abortion ban still in effect. Her abortion was done safely and legally in a hospital, and she died of complications. So this idea that abortion laws mean you're not allowed to try to save the woman's life, utter crap. And she's not the only pre-legalization legal abortion that I have. She's just the one that stands out to me the most because she died in 1961, which was the year I was born. And it's like, oh, I could have been a targeted fetus too, abortion laws or not. Dawn Ravenel, 13 years old. The school helped to arrange a secret abortion for her, took her to National Abortion Federation member Eastern Women's Center. They didn't thoroughly anesthetize her for her abortion. She started to gag and vomit. They stuck a breathing tube in, left her unattended while she slipped into a coma. It was only after they took her to the hospital that anybody thought to tell her family about it. And she never recovered from her coma. She died a slow, lingering death. And another woman who had an abortion at that clinic, Venus Ortiz, she was also left in a coma, languished in a nursing home for years before she finally died. But you can't blame it on abortion laws, so not very important. Oh, and by the way, Dawn was black. Erica Richardson, Maryland. Her aunt snuck her behind her parents' back for an abortion. It was 11 o'clock before he finally decided, well, you know, she's unconscious, but I'll just put her in her aunt's car. Had to carry her out to her aunt's car, take her home, put her to bed. The aunt took her to a hospital. She was pronounced dead there. Magdalena Rodriguez. This guy did so much damage to her uterus, and he had actually called a hospital, and they were prepped for her to arrive. He was doing abortions on other women while she was bleeding out internally. Finally calls an ambulance, doesn't tell them to take her to the hospital that was prepped for her. They take her to another hospital that was completely taken by surprise. They weren't expecting her. She had been bleeding so heavily internally that when they sliced her abdomen open to do surgery, the blood just splattered out like a freaking water balloon. But again, you can't blame it on abortion laws, so who cares? Allegra Roseberry. She was a cancer patient. She had had to undergo fertility treatments to have her son 20 years earlier. She wanted to get into an experimental cancer treatment program as her last-ditch attempt to save her life from her liver cancer. When they were doing some ultrasounds, they discovered that she was 20 weeks pregnant. They told her falsely that she would not be eligible for the cancer treatment program if she was pregnant. That is not true. There was no protocol for that cancer treatment program that excluded pregnant women, but they told her that it did, and they told her that her baby was doomed anyway because of the cancer treatments that she had undergone. So she consented to the abortion. The abortion killed her, and the autopsy showed that there had been nothing wrong with the baby. So she could have gotten into that cancer treatment program, and she could have had her baby. But they lied to her, tricked her into an unwanted abortion that killed her and a healthy baby. Stacy Ruckman. Her abortionist, I can't remember his name off the top of my head. No, it wasn't Scott Barrett, was it? I don't remember. At any rate, he was too cheap to hire somebody to actually help with anesthesia, but he liked his patients unconscious. So he would overdose them with lidocaine so that they'd have a toxic reaction, lose consciousness, then he'd do the abortion on his unconscious patient. Every so often the woman would stop breathing, but they'd do CPR and bring them back. But when they tried it with Stacy, it didn't work. She died. But again, can't blame it on abortion laws. Don't have to worry about it. Tamia Russell, 15-year-old girl, pregnant, so far advanced in her pregnancy that when her abuser's sister was making the rounds of abortion facilities trying to find one that would do the abortion. One of them actually offered her prenatal vitamins. But Abraham Alberto Hodari, darling of the pro-choice movement, Medical Students for Choice came and had this National Abortion Federation member come do a presentation for them. He told them he had a license to lie, to kind of guide patients into what he thought was the best choice for them. Went ahead, did this abortion anyway. She bled to death. And she wasn't the only Hodari death. Siobhan Williams and, oh, come on, what's her name? Regina Johnson also died from abortions at Hodari's National Abortion Federation clinic. But again, can't blame it on abortion laws, so doesn't matter. Carol Schenner, she and Margaret Louise Smith. Both of them, this is before Roe versus Wade, but New York had said, hey, as long as it's less than 24 weeks and you're a doctor, do anything you want. Free for all. We totally trust you. This carpetbagger named Jesse Ketchum, he'd been running illegal abortions in Ypsilanti, Michigan. Not a single dead patient to his discredit. Shuffled off to Buffalo, opened his abortion clinic in a motel room. Now, I think he might have actually been in a proper medical office by the time he did Carol and Margaret's abortions. Both cases, he was doing outpatient hysterotomy abortions. That's like a mini C-section where you just slice open the uterus, take the baby out, and let it die of prematurity. He was doing them vaginally, went in, sliced the uterus open, didn't stitch it back shut. They bled to death. But again, can't blame it on abortion laws. Angela Scott and Dolores Smith, two teenage girls, same day, National Abortion Federation clinic. Angela was in recovery and stopped breathing. The nurse who was doing the anesthesia for Dolores left the drip running while she went to help try to resuscitate Angela. They loaded Angela into an ambulance, headed her off to the hospital, went back and noticed that, well, they had overdosed this little girl. She was in her early teens, 14, 15, very young. Noticed that she'd slipped into a coma because they'd left her anesthesia drip running. But they called an ambulance, but they wouldn't let the ambulance crew take her until the doctor got back from riding to the clinic with Angela. Both of them lingered in comas before finally dying. They managed to fatally injure two teenage girls simultaneously, and Dolores hadn't even been pregnant. Can't blame it on abortion laws. Nothing to see here. Latacha Vial. She's one that the Centers for... This girl, okay, teenage girl, 17 years old. She went to Robert Christ. He was a circuit rider. He did the fatal abortion on Diane, whose last name's escaping me now, the intellectually disabled rape victim. He did the fatal abortion on her. He performed an abortion on Latachi, sent her home hemorrhaging. She bled to death. Her family hired a very vocal lawyer who got the news plastered all over the place in Texas and in Missouri where Diane had died. Chris discussed her death at a National Abortion Federation meeting that was attended by Lisa Coonan of the Centers for Disease Control. She was the one who verified abortion deaths. It was her job to identify and track legal abortion deaths. Chris discussed her death at the clinic. At least it must have been Latachi's death, unless he had another girl bleed to death in 1991. Latachi's death could not have been any more obvious if she had crawled to Atlanta and expired on the floor of Lisa Coonan's office with her aftercare instructions clutched in her hand. The CDC counted 0 deaths in her race and age range. They didn't even give her the dignity of making her a statistic. And we're supposed to believe that they actually count all the abortion deaths and they know how many women die. Okay, so that was my little list of abortion deaths where I just went through. There's way more than that, but I just went through and pulled out some of the ones, the more egregious ones where I had the information just available in my noggin. So we're supposed to believe that the abortion lobby and all these people in the media just care so much about women's deaths. They blame 2 deaths on abortion laws that did not even apply because if there's no fetus, it's not an abortion. They are so disingenuous, it's just appalling. I'm going to provide the link below to my playlist of safe and legal abortion deaths.